episode of Africa Today, where we get to the latest news and events taking place on the African scene. And we will start off with our major top stories and reports. Egypt recently announced that it sent an aid package and logistical and humanitarian support to Sudan. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi also stressed the need for joint action so that the current developments on the international scene do not affect efforts to help Sudan achieve political security and economic stability. More details on this report.
The World Health Organization reported that Africa is seeing the lowest levels of coronavirus cases and deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. According to the WHO Africa report, the continent has seen weekly cases drop for the past 16 weeks and deaths drop for the past 8. The last surge of cases was a result from the Omicron variant. Per statement from the agency, Africa went from seeing 308,000 cases per week to just 20,000 cases and deaths, so a decline of 29% and 37% in the past week. Africa hadn't seen levels this low since April of 2020. In addition, new variants can impact the evolution of the pandemic. In Botswana, the South Africa researchers are conducting further analysis into new lineage of Omicron variant recently detected there to determine whether they are more infectious or virulent. The BA.4 and BA.5 identified in the southern African countries have also been confirmed in Belgium, Denmark, Germany, and the United Kingdom.
Welcome back. We apologize. That was a report on the World Health Organization and coronavirus cases and death in Africa. And now we move back to our report on Sudan support.
Police, army and volunteer rescuers widened the search for dozens still missing 5 days after the deadliest storm to strike South Africa's coastal city of Durban, in living memory as the death toll rose to nearly 400. Regional head of the disaster managing ministry, the floods, which affected nearly 41,000, left a trail of destruction and at least 395 people dead, with the government coordinating the search and rescue operations. In a fleet of cars and helicopters carrying police experts set out early to come through a valley in Marine Hill suburb west of Durban to look for 12 people reported missing in the floods. It is an increasingly desperate search for survivors. Travis Trower, a director for the volunteer-run organization Rescue South Africa, said his team has found only corpses after following up 85 calls. For his part, President Ramaphosa, recalling the COVID-19 pandemic and the deadly July riots, described the floods as a catastrophe of enormous proportions not seen before in his country, urged Good Friday prayers for survivors.
Welcome back, and that was a report on the death toll from floods that have battered South Africa's east coast. And now we leave you with our last report. Stay tuned.
It sent aid packages and logistical and humanitarian support to Sudan at the conclusion of a surprise visit by Sudanese leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan to Cairo. The visit of Burhan, the head of the Sudanese military and chairman of the Sudanese Sovereign Council, follows a series of trips he made to several Arab and African capitals over the past days. Several Sudanese envoys were also dispatched to African countries, most recently Sovereign Council member Ibrahim Jaber, who visited Rwanda on March 31st. Burhan's recent visit, during which he met with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, comes as the flood season draws near and as Ethiopia remains determined to complete the filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile, which started generating electricity in February. Negotiations on the Grand Dam between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan are still on hold. The third filling is scheduled for July. During a press conference in Cairo, Sisi and Burhan announced that Egypt and Sudan have agreed to continue mutual coordination regarding the issue. They retreated that torture is a national security issue for the two peoples and said that the two countries are seeking to fair, legal and binding agreement fulfilling and operating the dam. Sisi also stressed the need for joint action so that the current developments on the international scene do not affect efforts to help Sudan achieve political security and economic stability.
نحن لدينا مصير مشترك.
مصر تسلمت الرئاسة الدورية للاتحاد الإفريقي لعام 2019 وتتطلع كعادتها دوما للتعبير عن شواغل الشعوب الإفريقية الشقيقة الرامية لتحقيق الاستقرار والتقدم ودفع عجلة التنمية قدما. إذا كنتم ترغبون في تغيير وجه القارة الأفريقية فالاتحاد الإفريقي كقيادة تستطيع أن تعمل وتدرس بشكل مركزي لمشروع عملاق لبناء بنية أساسية على مستوى القارة. أنا أتصور أن الأمن والاستقرار استثمار. إذا لم تستقر هذه القارة والأمن فيها بمعدلاته عالية هذا الأمر سينعكس بالسلب علينا كلنا.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and talking about climate change. 7. We're glad to be joined over the phone by Dr. Said Sabri, climate change expert. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, how can Egypt's hosting of the upcoming COP27 summit on climate change highlight the plight of Africa, the worst continent affected actually by the negative impacts of climate change?
It's well known that from the different reports done by the UNFCCC and the IPCC that the African continent will be the most continent affected by the climate change impact.
Yes.
Due to its geographical situation and also the large amount of desert and desertification in African continent, and the low development rate in African countries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi earlier said that the COP27 climate change summit will witness a constructive dialogue with the aim of producing ambitious results and developing initiatives that build on the outcomes of the Third Nations Ocean Conference. What's your take on that?
I think this what has been mentioned by His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in order to foster the cooperation between the African countries and also to build on the outcomes of the Glasgow summit on climate change. Mm-hmm. And we hope that personally, we hope that these efforts come to with good results, because as usual in the past the pledges by the developed countries and strong countries are not carried out sufficiently. Meaning that the amount of finance that have been pledged by the Western countries is less than the real one. For example, it was mentioned $100 billion US dollar every year for the developing countries to assist them to cope with the climate change impact. But in fact, what has been carried out on the ground is about 40%, 45% of this amount of finance, and also the same problem regarding technology transfer.
Yes.
That's why Egypt is focusing on fostering the efforts between the developing countries, and particularly for the African countries, in order to push and to push the developed countries towards increasing their commitment towards increasing the cooperation and the finance to cope with the climate change impact and to be able to combat the climate change.
Right, sir. Speaking about Egypt, what are the effects of climate change on coastal regions in the country? And it's noticeable that climate change has a hand in changing the patterns of weather or its intensity here in Egypt.
The climate change impact in Egypt are huge and very severe. Starting from the sea level rise and its impact on the coastal zones, the northern coastal zone particularly, and on the delta region. In addition to the what's called extreme events, I mean the heat waves and the cold waves that affect the agricultural productivity severely. And we practice this nowadays, not it is just an expectation, but we are suffering from these extreme events, the desert storms, I mean the sandstorms, the dust storms, the different types of extreme events, including the hurricanes and the others. So this is another huge threat. The increase in average temperature also affecting the temper of the people and the need to use huge energy for air conditioning and other uses of energy. Also the scarcity of water, because we are expecting that the runoff of the River Nile, I mean the budget of water that will come from the River Nile will decrease in the next year. This also, in addition to the increase of water demand by the increasing the population, this is another threat. In addition to this, summering all these types of threats which support each other will affect the Egypt economy, because they are suffering from water scarcity, from agricultural productivity, the cereal crops decreasing, and affect on the health of the people, either by increasing the danger of coming some hot region diseases like malaria and malaria diseases, in addition to the insufficient nutrition type of diseases. I mean the diseases that come from the decreased amount of sufficient food. All these types, in addition to other types like the effect on the tourism, because the touristic places will be affected by this variation of temperature by the climate change, and this will affect even the coral reefs in some areas in the Red Sea, which are touristic places. So we can imagine that all these types of threats gathering to each other with each other will affect the Egypt economy. This is really a very bad expectation of the threat of climate change. But Egypt is not standalone to cope with these types of threats. Egypt should do its best to cope with to combat climate change through making the strategies and plans, action plans to combat climate change, starting from each sector, the agriculture sector, the water resource sector, the energy sector, all the industrial sector, all these types of sectors should have their own strategies, sub-national strategies, or sectoral strategies and sectoral plans within the overall national strategy of climate change. And now Egypt has its own national strategy of climate change, or to address climate change.
Yes. Dr. Sabri, speaking about marine biodiversity, how far has it affected or been affected by climate change, and how much are we losing with regards to the reef barrier, sea animals, and reefs every year?
It is well known that the biodiversity is the treasure of the food for all the world. Without biodiversity, the humanity cannot find the food, and that's why this issue was addressed at the same time by the Convention of Biodiversity in 1992, when the three conventions are addressed at the same time: desertification, biodiversity, and climate change.
Yes.
Because it is well known that the climate change will affect severely the biodiversity and desertification, and
Yes.
there is a mutual effect between each other. For example, we can find some species cannot withstand and cannot cope with the increase in temperature in some areas, and they can migrate to another area, and or they can start to decrease, to exempt. Some extension of these types of species, which are important for the balance in nature. and the other species also, there is a population of these species can decrease with a great large percent. So the effect of the climate change on the biodiversity is huge, and we have to correlate between the mutual effect of the biodiversity and the climate change. And I think for the time being now, we are in Egypt and all over the world, there is an initiative to correlate between the biodiversity convention and the climate change, and to make the synergy between the efforts that have been done to combat climate change and also to preserve the biodiversity.
Right. Well, I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Saeed Sabri, climate change expert. Many thanks for your insight. And dear viewers, that brings us to the end of this edition of Africa Today. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile TV International.